In the beginning, there was only silence and blood. Before the empires, before the Caesars, before the legions marched beneath the eagle of Rome, there was only a man, or rather a story, and perhaps a lie. His name was Romulus, and according to tradition, he was the one who founded Rome, killed his own brother, and became the first king of the city that would one day rule the world. But what happens when we dig too deep into this legend? What we uncover is unsettling, because Romulus may have never existed. Rome's foundation may have been built not on truth but on blood and fiction. For centuries, we've been told that Rome was born from the bravery of an abandoned child, raised by a she-wolf, and destined for greatness. But what if that tale was nothing more than a carefully staged illusion crafted by Rome's elites to justify violence, power, and conquest? If you think you know the story of Rome, think again. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear might forever change the way you see the greatest empire in history. In this documentary, we'll tear through the veil of myth and descend through 6 layers of hidden truth, from ancient folklore to conspiracy, murder, and historical manipulation, all the way to the archaeological evidence that could dismantle or confirm the existence of the man who founded Rome. Prepare yourself, because this is not the story of a king. It's the origin of a monster, the monster called the Roman Empire. In the beginning, Rome was nothing but a swamp, a desolate marshland, crawling with wolves and outlaws, where life was worth less than a broken spear. And yet, in this hostile wilderness, the most enduring tale in history begins. According to legend, 2 brothers were born of a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia, the daughter of Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa. She was forced into chastity by her uncle Amulius, who had seized the throne, but fate or the gods intervened. Mars, the god of war, was said to have fathered her children through divine assault, a god's rape, giving rise to Romulus and Remus. Upon discovering their birth, Amulius acted without hesitation. He ordered the twins to be cast into the Tiber River, helpless infants, condemned to die before they could even grasp the world. But the waters spared them. Their basket ran aground near the Palatine Hill, where, legend says, a she-wolf found them. The wolf. This is the first symbol that demands scrutiny. For centuries, it was believed that a wild beast nursed the children with her own milk. But in ancient Rome, Lupa was also slang for prostitute, a she-wolf, or a cast-out woman who took into abandoned sons. The tale begins like a fable but quickly reveals its darker undertones. Who truly saved Romulus and Remus? Who ensured their survival against all odds? And why was this story repeated so insistently by Roman writers centuries after the fact? As they grew, the brothers became natural leaders among shepherds and outcasts alike. Sharp-minded, strong, charismatic, they began to dream of something greater. A city, a legacy, a name that would echo for eternity. But to found Rome, blood had to be spilled, family blood. When choosing where the city should rise, a fatal rift emerged. Romulus chose the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred the Aventini. Neither would yield. It wasn't a dispute over land, it was a clash for power, for dominance, for eternal glory. What happened next has been rewritten countless times. But one thing remains constant. Romulus killed Remus. The most accepted version claims Remus mocked his brother's wall, leaping over it to show its weakness. Romulus killed him for the insult. Other accounts speak of ambush, of execution, of cold-blooded fratricide. Romulus became the first king of Rome. But at what cost? To build a city with your own hands is one thing. To build it over your brother's corpse is another. That's not leadership. It's a message. Rome would not rise on ideals but on the ruthless triumph of the strong. Here lies the first great contradiction. The city that would become the cradle of civilization, of law, of the Senate, of the Republic, was born from murder. Rome's origin is not in philosophy or democracy. It's in the blade that severed 2 brothers. Romulus traced the city's boundary with a plow. The furrow he carved into the earth was sacred, a silent warning. Cross this line, and you die, even if you're my own blood. Rome was founded. But stop and consider this. All of it, this tragic theater, was passed down by historians writing centuries later. No eyewitnesses, no contemporary accounts, only echoes. Echoes shaped by those in power, who stood to gain from this narrative, who benefited by linking Rome to Mars, the god of war, by portraying fratricide as strength, and more. Why insist so vehemently on Romulus as a hero, when his story begins with abandonment, violence, disobedience, and murder? The myth is seductive, but the truth is often inconvenient, and perhaps far darker. Before we continue, a direct question to you watching. What's more dangerous, a king who kills his brother, or a story manipulated for centuries to hide something even worse? Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened between Romulus and Remus that day? Because from this point on, what we're about to uncover may challenge everything you thought you knew about the founding of Rome. Now that the legend is laid bare, it's time to tear through the veil of fiction and step into the shadows of history's most enduring creation. Romulus, a name that has echoed through millennia as a symbol of power, origin, and empire. But where is the proof that he ever truly existed? No coin bears his likeness, no monument built by his hands, no inscriptions from his time, no eyewitness accounts. Everything we know about Romulus comes from texts written centuries after Rome's supposed founding. In 753 BC, the most cited sources Livy, Plutarch, and Dionysius of Halicarnassus lived between 100 BC and 100 AD. That's more than 6 centuries after the death of Rome's first king. Imagine writing a detailed biography today of someone who lived in the 1400s, with no reliable records from the time. Sounds absurd? That's exactly what traditional historiography attempts with Romulus. And the question that haunts the archives of history is deeply unsettling. What if Romulus was never real? There's a bold theory, one respected by serious scholars, that Romulus was not a man, but a political creation, a symbol crafted by Roman elites to bestow divine legitimacy upon a city, born from tribal conflict, plunder, and bloodshed. In this reading, Romulus is not an individual, but a symbolic fusion, part Mars, the god of war, part Quirinus, a Roman deity associated with social order and warfare, and part every tribal chieftain and warrior whose struggle gave rise to the city. He is an archetype, a mirror forged by time. And there's more. The name Romulus, a diminutive of Rome, feels less like a personal name, and more like narrative convenience, as if Paris were founded by someone named Porcinus, or Brasilia, by a man called Brasilius. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. Rome needed a hero, one who was strong, divine, beyond reproach, a hero who could justify the city's violent origins and serve as a cornerstone for future imperial expansion. By creating Romulus, the Romans forged their own mythology, a hero cast in their own image, brutal, ambitious, cunning, relentless. But why wasn't this story ever questioned? Why did this narrative stand unchallenged for so many centuries? Because the myth served a purpose. During the Republic, Romulus was held up as the embodiment of martial virtue. As Rome expanded, conquering lands, destroying cultures, absorbing gods, the legend of Romulus offered moral justification. We descend from one chosen by the gods. Everything we do is under divine sanction. And the myth's utility didn't stop there. At the height of empire, Augustus, the first emperor, presented himself as the new Romulus. He restored ancient temples, revived old cults, and reconstructed the image of Rome's founding king as part of a sweeping propaganda campaign. Romulus, the myth, never dies, because he is not confined to the past. He is resurrected, reimagined, and reshaped to fit the needs of power. And here, things take an even darker turn. According to tradition, Romulus didn't die. He vanished. In the middle of an assembly in the field of Mars, during a storm, lightning tore across the sky, and when the clouds cleared, Romulus was gone. Witnesses claimed a light filled the heavens and he was taken by the gods. That's the official version. But there's another, one rarely spoken aloud. It is said that Romulus was murdered by the very senators who served under him, torn to pieces, his body hidden, and afterward, reinvented. This secret version suggests a political coup. Rome's aristocrats, fearing the king's growing power, eliminated him and replaced his death with a tale of divine ascension. Murder masked by myth, violence sanctified by story, assassination turned to apotheosis. Rome, which would one day slay its emperors, began by deifying its first victim. If this version is true, then Rome's foundation is darker than any war it ever waged. It means that from its very inception, the city was built on manipulation, deceit, and concealment. And the people fed a carefully crafted illusion. Look back now. Romulus is born of rape, survives attempted infanticide, kills his own brother, founds a city with blood, imposes law by force, vanishes under mysterious circumstances, and becomes a god. Does that sound like a biography? Or the most elaborate propaganda script in ancient history? The truth is often too plain to inspire loyalty. But a myth can move legions. So, viewer, consider this carefully. If Rome lied about its first king, What else did it hide? If you're beginning to see the shadow behind the story, like this video and share it with someone who still believes the official version. Because the next revelation will show how this myth was weaponized and how it shaped the entire political structure of ancient Rome. Romulus had vanished. And that's the word they used, vanished. According to the official version, during an assembly in the field of Mars, the sky darkened. Lightning split the heavens. A violent storm engulfed the gathering. When the light returned, Romulus was gone. The stunned crowd was told he had been taken by the gods, lifted into the sky, transformed into an immortal being. He was to be worshipped as Quirinus, a divine figure embodying Rome's warrior spirit and its legislative soul. But why did a vanished king need to become a god? The answer is simpler and more disturbing than it seems. Because a dead king can be replaced, but a god rules forever. By turning Romulus into Quirinus, the Romans weren't honoring their founder. They were crafting a new instrument of control. The cult of the vanished king served a clear political function: to cement power through fear, faith, and symbolic immortality. Imagine a ruler who never dies, who cannot be questioned, who cannot be judged. Whenever Rome's leaders faced resistance, they invoked a single phrase: "This is what Romulus would have wanted." There could be no rebuttal. He was the ideal beyond scrutiny. Rome had erected a new throne, not on the Palatine Hill but in the invisible, the throne of myth. And from that moment on, Romulus became far more useful dead than alive. The Roman Senate, those same men who were with him the day he disappeared, stood to gain enormous power in his absence. The story of divine ascension, carefully spread, shielded them from suspicion and tied them directly to the divine. After all, they were the last to see him before he rose to the heavens. But there's something even more unsettling. The cult of Quirinus was not a vague reverence. It involved oaths of loyalty, blood rituals, and initiation ceremonies for young warriors. Quirinus wasn't just honored, he was feared. During the Republic, his cult reinforced military values: courage, discipline, sacrifice, not as virtues but as demands. To defy Roman order was to defy Romulus himself. And when the empire arrived, the logic only deepened. Augustus, master of political theater, revived the cult of Romulus with fervor. He restored temples, revived ancient rites, and most importantly, he declared himself the new Romulus. History was repeating itself, but now, with greater sophistication. Augustus portrayed himself as the man chosen by the gods to restore Rome's former glory. And what symbol best captured that vision? Romulus, the king who never died. Look at the cycle. A king disappears in mystery, becomes a god. His myth justifies a republic that transforms into an empire. An emperor rises claiming divine succession from that same god. This isn't mere religion, it's architecture of power. The immortality of Romulus was useful because it was flexible. When Rome needed strength, Romulus was a warrior. When it needed law, he was a legislator. When it needed obedience, he was a divine judge. And the people, they accepted. Because to question Romulus was to question Rome itself. And to question Rome was treason. Treason against the state. Treason against the gods. Treason against eternity. A prison with no bars. Forged not of iron but of story. Now ask yourself, how many other historical figures were kept alive this way? How many rulers preserved not by the sword, but by memory? And more, how often has blind faith replaced truth? Romulus didn't disappear. He was taken by the cold hands of politics. The man became myth. The myth became cult. The cult became law. And in Rome, the law was absolute. If, by now, you feel like you've never truly known Rome's first king, get ready, because in the next chapter, we'll follow the trail of physical evidence, or the lack of it left behind by Romulus. We'll join archaeologists, historians, and skeptics in search of the truth that could unravel the very foundation of a legend. But before we go further, share this video with someone who believes ancient history is simple. Because what we're revealing here isn't just about Rome, it's about how power hides inside symbols. Like this video now, and tell us in the comments, do you believe Romulus was assassinated, deified, or never existed at all? Romulus vanished. That is the accepted version. And when a body disappears, two paths emerge. Either we are witnessing a miracle, or a perfectly concealed crime. For centuries, the Romans chose the first. It was more convenient, more glorious. The founder of the city had been taken by the gods, like a new Hercules, a divinity among mortals, transformed into Quirinus, eternalized as the living symbol of Rome's divine destiny. But not everyone accepted this tale without question. because there's a troubling detail, a literal void at the heart of Rome's origin. The total absence of any official tomb for Romulus. No mausoleum. No bones. No funerary artifacts. Not a single piece of physical evidence to confirm the existence of this king. And here begins one of the most controversial investigations in Roman archaeology. In 1899, excavations in the Roman Forum uncovered a mysterious structure, a slab of volcanic stone surrounded by steps and an altar. Some archaeologists identified it as the lapis niger, the black stone. Ancient inscriptions were found nearby, fragments of archaic Latin, difficult to decipher, but mentioning a king, priests, and harsh punishments for anyone who violated the site. Theories quickly surfaced. Was this Romulus's tomb? Was that altar the location of his original cult, buried by centuries of history? But there was a problem. The lapis niger is a chaotic, fragmented structure. Its dating uncertain, and worse, nothing found there directly links it to Romulus. No name, no image, no concrete connection. In the end, all we have is a stone, surrounded by silence and speculation. Some believe this site was deliberately erased, that Rome's own elites, after allegedly assassinating Romulus, destroyed all physical traces that might expose their crime. Others argue the opposite, that there was never a body at all, because there was never a Romulus made of flesh and blood. And then there's a third possibility, that his body was buried in secret, not to cover up a crime, but to protect the city from chaos. Imagine the shock to a newly founded city if its king had been stabbed and dismembered by those sworn to protect him. Rome didn't need a martyr, it needed a god. And here, the absence becomes a presence. Romulus lived on in temples, on imperial coins, in stories told in city squares. But that presence was purely ideological. A missing body turned into a useful myth. The more they searched for evidence, the more they found nothing. A void that unsettles, a void that screams. Because every ancient city preserved its founders. Athens had Theseus, Sparta revered Lycurgus, even Troy honored its mythical heroes. But Rome has a name, a narrative, and a hole dug into the heart of its city. In 2007, a new discovery caused a stir. Archaeologists announced the possible finding of a sanctuary dedicated to Romulus, a niche and circular slab beneath the Comitium. Within the Forum, the media called it the symbolic tomb of Romulus. But when the details emerged, it became clear, again, no direct evidence. No body. No personal artifacts. Just speculation. Just another attempt to fill the void with desire. The truth is brutal. For more than 2,000 years, Rome built its greatness on the absence of its own creator. The founder with no tomb. The king with no face. The body no one ever saw. And this is not just a historical problem. It's a crisis of identity. Because if Romulus never existed, or if he was murdered and erased, then the moral and mythical foundation of Rome collapses. What remains is not a civilization born of heroes, but of killers with good rhetoric. And so we return to the central question. Where is the body? Perhaps at the bottom of the Tiber. Perhaps in a crypt never revealed. Or perhaps it never existed. Think about it. The greatest empire in history, the one that shaped the West, was born from a figure that can neither be proven nor denied. A specter. An echo. And maybe that is Rome's most effective secret. Because what cannot be found cannot be killed. Are you beginning to understand? Romulus is not a man. He is a void filled with authority. An absence that commands presence. Absolute. Unchallenged. And this illusion, this masterstroke of manipulation will only grow clearer in the next chapter. How Romulus's image was rewritten, generation after generation, to justify wars, reforms, and dictatorships. But first, comment below. What do you believe Rome tried to hide by erasing its king's tomb? History is a battlefield, and in Rome, it was never written in ink, but in blood. When we observe the figure of Romulus across the centuries, something unsettling emerges. He never stayed the same. Romulus was a warrior, then a king, then a lawgiver, then a god. In every age, he became exactly what was needed to justify the actions of those in power. Romulus was a mirror, a mold, an excuse. During the Roman Republic, the myth of Romulus was used to validate unpopular decisions. Senators invoked the spirit of the founding to wage wars of conquest, crush internal revolts, and silence dissent. The message was clear. Romulus sacrificed everything for the good of Rome, even his own brother. Who are you to question Rome's will? The legend became a political argument. Violence was noble because it was ancestral. Obedience was sacred because it came from the founder. This manipulation only intensified with the rise of the emperors. Augustus, the first among them, was a master of propaganda. He restored temples, revived archaic cults, and forged a lineage that linked him to Annius and through Annius, to Mars and Romulus. He presented himself as the new Romulus, not merely in symbolism, but in practice, centralizing power, rewriting laws, reshaping the city, and announcing a new era. But with one crucial difference: Augustus would not vanish in a storm, he would be worshipped in life. The message was unmistakable. Romulus had founded Rome with iron and blood. Augustus would restore it with order and absolute rule. And the manipulation didn't stop there. Every emperor who followed reshaped Romulus in his own image. Nero, paranoid and authoritarian, praised Romulus as a ruthless leader who did what had to be done even against his own kin. Domitian, cruel and vain, saw in Romulus the reflection of a superior being ordained by the heavens. Constantine, the Christianizer of the empire, tried to merge Romulus's image with new Christian values, erasing the savage origin and highlighting a divine mission of unity. Romulus became, generation after generation, a tool for political adaptation. Even Roman historians played their part. Livy softened the myth's brutality. Plutarch, a Hellenized Greek, gave it a philosophical tone, casting Romulus's deeds as tragic virtue. Dionysius of Halicarnassus blended the tale with Greek hero motifs to appeal to a broader audience. Every pen that wrote about Romulus wasn't seeking truth, it was seeking narrative control. And this isn't conspiracy theory, it's statecraft. Rome understood a crucial truth: ruling bodies is hard, ruling minds is final. That's why Romulus's story was constantly rewritten, reorganized, and recycled. The people changed, the values changed, but the legend always served. When Rome needed expansion, Romulus became the conqueror. When it needed discipline, he became the lawgiver. When the empire was crumbling, he became a divine savior. Never a mistake, always a solution. With every crisis, the myth adapted like a virus, and the more the masses believed in him, the further they drifted from truth. The rewriting of Romulus's myth wasn't a historical accident. It was a policy of the state, a vaccine against doubt, a moral shield for immoral acts. And that should make you ask yourself, how many other historical figures have been treated the same way? If Romulus was shaped by convenience, if his very existence is uncertain, then where does the myth end and the lie begin? Or perhaps, in Rome, the two always walked hand in hand. Romulus is the archetype of absolute power justified by necessary violence. Did he kill his brother? It was necessary. Did he vanish without a trace? It was to become a god. No body. Doesn't matter, there is faith. No proof. Doesn't matter, there is tradition. Truth has no place in empire. Only utility. Can you see it now? Rome wasn't just built with engineering, armies, and law. It was built with stories told, twisted, glorified. And the greatest of all those stories was Romulus. In the next chapter, we'll confront everything you've heard so far. You'll meet the thinkers, the dissidents, those who dared to question the myth, the ones Rome tried to silence but who left behind clues. But before we continue, tell us in the comments, do you believe the myth of Romulus was a tool of domination? And more, what other figures in history might have been forged the same way? Share your thoughts. Share this video with someone who still believes history is made of facts alone. Because next, we'll uncover the first whispers of rebellion against the official myth. Not everyone bowed before the myth. Even in the earliest centuries of the Republic, faint voices began to rise, questioning the very foundation of Rome's official story. Yet Rome, as it often did, knew how to silence those who dared to ask, with exile, with oblivion, or with death. Still, a few names endured like whispers echoing through the dim corridors of forgotten history. Among them stood Ennius, a poet of the 3rd century BC, who dared to approach Rome's origins with a skepticism that teetered on the forbidden. In verses mostly lost to time, he hinted that Romulus should not be read literally, that the founder of Rome was more metaphor than man. His writings, preserved only in scattered fragments, were likely suppressed. And yet, what survived was enough to provoke the suggestion that Rome's birth may have been a symbol, not a fact. Later came Lucretius, the Epicurean philosopher whose De Rerum Natura remains one of antiquity's great poetic works. Nowhere in its vast lines does he mention Romulus. This was not oversight, it was defiance. Lucretius railed against religious fear and the manipulation of the divine. To omit the divine founder of Rome was, in itself, a subversive gesture, a silent rebellion, He vanished from the public sphere as mysteriously as the man he refused to name. Some said he went mad, others whispered of poison. The official histories declined to ask. In the realm of history, another voice rose: Polybius, a Greek scholar who lived in Rome and chronicled its systems with cold precision. He dissected the grand narratives of origin with surgical clarity, writing that all great cities invent heroic beginnings, yet in truth, empires are born of chance, violence, and ambition. He never spoke Romulus's name, but the myth felt the cut. Centuries later, Cicero, master of rhetoric and philosophy, wielded his words with subtle danger. Publicly, he avoided challenging the founder. Privately, in letters laced with irony, he referred to Rome's origin as a child wrapped in marble, a city sculpted not by truth but by illusion. Cicero was ultimately beheaded, his severed head displayed in the Forum, not necessarily for mocking Romulus, but for being a man who knew too much and spoke too well. Within Christian thought, the early theologians also joined the quiet dismantling of Rome's pagan legends. Augustine of Hippo, in his monumental City of God, denounced the idea that Rome was a divine creation. To him, Romulus was no god, just a man, his apotheosis, a blasphemy. But Augustine went further. He called the fratricide at Rome's birth a sign of the curse that marked the city from the beginning. It was the 5th century. The empire was collapsing, and for the first time in a millennium, the myth of Romulus began to tremble. Yet even as Rome crumbled, the legend lived on. It was exported, repackaged, reborn. The kings of the Middle Ages likened themselves to Romulus. Napoleon styled himself as heir to empire founders. Even Mussolini attempted to resurrect the cult-ordering excavations of the Roman Forum, desperate to find proof of the mythical beginning. And what did he uncover? Nothing. Because there was nothing. Because it was never the body they sought but the sacred aura of unchallenged rule. Still, the opposing voices never fully faded. Modern archaeologists like Andrea Crandini, who excavated the Palatine Hill, have dared to say aloud what was once whispered, that Romulus was a literary construction, a fusion of myth and national identity. And why does that matter? Because the bravery of these voices reveals just how powerful the myth remains and how much it takes to confront it. Across the centuries, those who challenged the narrative were not destroyed by secret plots but by the weight of tradition, by the inertia of belief, by the comfort of myth. It has always been easier to believe in Romulus than to accept that Rome was born from chaos, rape, murder, and tribal opportunism. It is more soothing to live inside a legend. But these voices, those rebellious whispers, leave behind a warning. Every official history is a choice, and every choice hides something. At last, we arrive at the end of this journey. But before the epilogue, a question remains for you. Should historical truth prevail even when it threatens to destroy the symbols we've come to cherish? If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because now, in the final chapter, we will confront the most unsettling truth of all, that Romulus never died, because he never needed to exist. Romulus killed his brother, vanished into a storm, became a god, became a statue, became silence. For centuries, Rome repeated this script with pride, with conviction, and with a deep fear of the truth. But now that every layer has been stripped away, now that the myth has been dissected, a realization begins to emerge. Romulus was never the beginning. He was the excuse. Rome was not born in 753 BC. It emerged slowly through rival tribes, land disputes, fragile alliances, and calculated murders. It was filthy, brutal, instinctive, in other words human. But such origins were far too ugly to become a symbol. So they invented Romulus. They gave him a divine father. They created a rival for him to kill. They built invisible walls round out. And with that, they achieved the impossible. They erased chaos with a story. They erased truth with a legend. To this day, archaeologists still search for proof of his existence. Theologians reframe his ascension. Historians gamble their credibility by suggesting he never lived at all. But in the end, it doesn't matter whether Romulus was real, because his usefulness was greater than his presence. He wasn't created to be remembered. He was created to be believed. Rome was not founded. It was narrated, drawn in words, shaped by fear, sustained by obedience. And perhaps, the entire empire was nothing more than that, a well-told fiction, echoed by legions. Now stop, breathe, and ask yourself, how many other myths have you swallowed as truth? How many stories still echo today in nations, in religions, in ideologies built from the same mold as Romulus, holy founders, perfect beginnings, heroes without bodies. Rome's line never ended. It only changed form, changed language, but it lives on in speeches, in flags, in school books. So the question is, what will you do with this information? Will you bury it and return to the safety of the myth? Or will you begin to question every story sold to you as absolute truth? If you've made it this far, something in you has already changed. You've witnessed the birth of history's most successful lie. And now, the choice is yours. What will you do with this truth? Comment below. Romulus didn't die. He lives in every historical lie we accept without question. Let this message echo beyond the algorithm. Let us build something greater than an empire, a thinking, questioning, defiant audience. Subscribe now, not just to follow more stories like this, but to join a movement that sees through the curtain of history. Share this video with someone who still clings to the legend. Save it. You'll want to revisit it again, and again and again, because in the end, the only way to kill the myth is to spread the truth.